This is the White House. We have nothing to say. Oh, where's my notes for this day? 48th minute. We're only watching 2 minutes. Don't worry, we're not doing much of this anymore. I am finding less and less interest in what they have to say. Unless they get snarky or say much, we'll be listening to Ned. Karine has nothing to say. Ned at least talks. I guess maybe because their reporters are better too.
Key officials would be, but again, we are prepared, we are willing to have that conversation, to do the briefing, but just not going to get into the specifics of who.
Third topic, a number of surveys police made over the weekend showed that majority of Democrats don't want the president to seek re-election.
But that's a ballsy question to ask. A majority of Democrats don't want Biden to run for re-election.
Looking for new generation concerns about his age. Without getting into whether or not the president will announce, does the president believe that he has to address those concerns from his own constituents?
So
They're having issues with his age. The old man is senile, and we don't know if we want to re-elect him. A majority of Democrats in this poll said no. No, they don't.
as you just laid out, I'm going to be very careful, covered by the Hatch Act. Don't want to get into the specifics of what 2024 is going to look like or any underlying components of that. The president has been very clear he intends to run. And, you know, I think the way that we should look at this is what we saw from the midterms, right? I think that's a really important point there where the president laid out the policy, right? He's the one that laid out the policy for senators and congressional members to really have a midterms that did not lead to a red wave, right? We saw what happened in the Senate. We saw that, yes,
yeah, it has all to do with your amazing president that you barely avoided a red wave. Like, if your president was awesome, wouldn't you guys have a blue wave? Like, oh my God, the Democrats are doing so well. No, you're like, we barely held off a red wave. We're amazing. We're incredible. We almost held off a red wave. We kind of still have a little bit of power. We're incredible. That's such a weak bar. That's such a weak fucking restraint. Like,
Republicans now have Congress, but by slim majority. We were told it was going to be more than 60 seats, and it's not that at all. And that's because the president went out there, spoke directly to the American people, and laid out what it is that we have done the last 2 years, how we've built. You've heard from Brian Deese just moments ago. He took many, many questions laying out the president's economic plan, how it's working, but how there's still more work to do. But it's essentially talking through the different policies that became legislation, that turned into law. That was historic. And all of those pieces matter. And I think the State of the Union, he'll have an opportunity to speak directly to the American people, not just Congress, to talk about what we have done what he has done the last 2 years, and how he sees the future of this country. And so, I'm not going to get into what the president should respond to. I think, the president always says this: watch him, and see what he does. And I think he has a record over the last 2 years that shows that he has delivered. And that's the numbers that we're going to pay attention to. Right? We're going to pay attention to unemployment, how it's been down more than 53 years, a historic unemployment. We're going to pay attention to more than almost 12 million.
a historic unemployment. We have historic numbers because people have stopped looking for work. People are getting laid off and don't even try anymore. Historic unemployment. 50 years. It's a joke.
Million jobs that has been created under this president. We're going to pay attention to the
We've created so many jobs. I mean, we're including fucking people going back to work from COVID in that number, which is ridiculous, but we've created it. You're ridiculous.
800,000 manufacturing jobs that has been created under this president. And I think that's what we're going to continue to work on, and that's what we're going to continue to speak to.
Thanks, Grant.
Oh, she said nothing. What do you know? That's all I have to say about her this week. That's it. That's all we have for Corinne. All right. 6. Let us move on. And we will get... This day is not as important as the next, so... Let's get at her.
Chinese debt clear foreign minister will visit to Russia.
All right. Since she is very hard to understand, let's make sure we read it. The Chinese deputy foreign minister will visit Russia.
Yeah. And
also it is reported that China supplied military equipment to Russia defense.
China supplied military equipment to Russian defense company, and
the company supported and the invasion of Ukraine.
to the invasion of Ukraine. Do you have anything there? How can you see
How can you see that Russia and China, they get together right now?
that Russia and China get
Well, this is something we've spoken about extensively over the better part of a year now. The relationship between the PRC and Russia that in some ways has deepened. We've seen very tangible manifestations of that. It was just about a year ago, maybe almost exactly a year ago, if memory serves, where we saw a communique emerge between the PRC and Russia, speaking of a friendship with no limits. We have seen the PRC attempt to take what they portray as a neutral stance to Russia's brutal war against Ukraine, but in reality, it's been anything but. They've provided Russia with rhetorical support. They've provided them with political support. They have continued their economic relationship as well. Our message to the PRC has been very simple. We're watching very closely. There are and would be costs and consequences if we were to see a systematic effort to help Russia bypass the sanctions that dozens of countries around the world have enacted against the Kremlin, President Putin, others, for this brazen aggression against Ukraine. And there would be consequences for the provision of lethal material that Russia could then use against civilians in Ukraine in the same way that it sought lethal material from Iran, from DPRK, to use against the people of Ukraine.
one more on North Korea. North Korea is preparing for the largest scale
All right, one more on North Korea. North Korea is preparing for a large-scale military parade this Wednesday.
military parade this Wednesday. How is the
How is U.S. prepared for this contingency?
U.S. preparing for contingency?
Well, these are always exercises that we watch. I think it is almost certainly the case that these have more messaging and propaganda value than any material value to the DPRK.
Sound familiar? Our military exercises, our military operations that we have these exercises. South Korea, we have exercises in all sorts of areas in the Middle East. Sound familiar? Man, he is just the best at the pot calling the kettle black. Like, he just calls it as we do it. He just calls it as we do it anyway. Oh, come on, I don't want to listen to him twice.
Could then use against civilians in Ukraine in the same way that it sought lethal material from Iran, from DPRK, to use against the people of Ukraine.
One more on North Korea. North Korea is preparing for the largest scale military parade this Wednesday. How is the U.S. preparing for contingency?
Well, these are always exercises that we watch. I think it is almost certainly the case that these have more messaging and propaganda value than any material value to the DPRK, but we're of course going to be watching as we always do.
How are we going to be watching? With our spy satellites? How are we going to be watching? With our massive spy network? Oh man, they just...
We are investing in our alliances and our partnerships in the region and well beyond.
We're investing in our alliances, which are usually, what? Coups, terrorists? What are we investing in nowadays? I mean, you can't tell us, but it's probably horrible. Like, who are we giving money to go against this? Oh, man.
As you know, the Secretary's ROK counterpart was in Washington on Friday. They had an opportunity to have a wide-ranging discussion about the challenges and opportunities that are presented in the Indo-Pacific region and well beyond. At the top of that list of challenges is the DPRK. It's
I wonder how many tops of the list that the United States Defense Department, fucking joke if that is. I wonder how many countries that's the number one fear for them. That's their number one, like, concern, their number one driving motivation is staying out of the fucking crosshairs of them.
why we're committed with an ironclad basis to the security of our ROK ally, to the security of our Japanese allies. It's why we have attempted to deepen and to advance trilateral cooperation, not just in the context of the DPRK and its ballistic missile and nuclear weapons program, but across the range of challenges and opportunities that our free countries, that our alliance faces.
Man, I would like to. I was listening to Real Talk Joe. Oh shit! Real Mighty Joe. Fucking what's his name? Damn it. Anyway, I was listening to him, and he's talking about doing an editorial about how to video clip. So I can't wait for that, because I would like the video clip all the time. He says our allies. It's seriously, like, sometimes it sounds like we're the empire. Like, it's really bad. I would also like to clip down all the times I'll have to send you to. That was weird. I'll have to send you to from Kareen, because Kareen says the same catchphrase all the time too. I want to clip it down, like just one video, clip it down so you see how many times they repeat these things. I watch a lot of hours of this. It's really funny.
Japanese allies. It's why we have attempted to deepen and to advance trilateral cooperation, not just in the context of the DPRK and its ballistic missile and nuclear weapons program, but across the range of challenges and opportunities that our three countries, that our alliance faces. Yes, go ahead.
Our alliance.
One, just on what my colleague just used the term overreactive with regard to China. Is how much truth do you think it is in if you say that the U.S. overreacted with this President Biden being pressured from like the U.S. media a little too much, and there is not much truth into the surveillance equipment terminology there, and that it was just some media people who didn't want President Biden and China to get a little bit closer. You know, they were not interested in Blinken's visit, and is there any truth to that, do you think, or no? There was some surveillance equipment found.
Oh, I just like to quit on these faces. That's why we got there. Oh wait, I want to do the India, Pakistan. But look at his face, man. I could just use that for every freaking video clip. I laugh at it all the time.
So a couple things there. First, it is a fundamental misunderstanding of the United States to suggest that we take these sort of actions based on anything other than what's in our national interest. This was a decision that the president made in close consultation with the Secretary of State, with the National Security Advisor, with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, with the Secretary of Defense as well. And ultimately, the course of action was one that was put forward and executed by the Department of Defense. When it comes to what we've heard from the PRC, I'm just not going to give that too much oxygen. Let me see if I can state it as clearly as I can. The PRC knows precisely what this was. The PRC knows precisely why this was in our airspace.
You know what we're talking about, right? I don't have to lay this shit out. It's all the only thing that fucking everybody's talking about is, I mean, in the sphere that I watch, is the damn China balloon. The China balloon. Dun, dun, dun. Like, we have so many fucking spy satellites on every nation. The NSA is listening to every phone conversation. We got in trouble, like what, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, for spying on the Germans and like all these presidents and all these elected officials in other countries. We got hit hard, and yet balloons, right? Like, just that's all people want to fucking talk about.
PRC knows precisely what this was doing over the United States, and ultimately, the PRC knows precisely why we did what we did. The Secretary made the point on Friday that if the shoe were on the other foot, if something analogous were to have happened within PRC airspace, you can only imagine the response from Beijing.
Yo, what up, intellectual? Yeah, this shit's fucking funny, man. The one from yesterday is the real day we gotta check out, but this shit's funny to me.
We've been clear, we've been resolute, but we've also been practical as well. And we have taken practical steps since the time this high-altitude surveillance balloon was detected to mitigate its ability to collect intelligence against sensitive sites, to mitigate any threat it could pose to the American people. But more than that, in a way, we flipped the script because we've trained quite a bit of capabilities of our own at this high-altitude surveillance balloon. While
we flipped the script. Oh, dude, just straight up say it. We've been spying on them for fucking years. We flipped this script.
was violating our airspace. We learned quite a bit about it and the practice in general, the technology that was on board. And as you've heard, I think just recently from my colleagues at the Department of Defense, there is an active effort underway to recover what is left of this high-altitude surveillance balloon on the surface of the ocean. And in the coming days, there will be an effort to collect what we can from the bottom of the ocean.
In Pakistan.
We're gonna dive in the winter in the Arctic Circle to get fucking more bits of this? That's ridiculous. We're intense. We are intense on our hatred of China.
And in my home city, Peshawar, we have.
Well, anything else on China before we go on? John, go ahead.
Just on those statements you just made, have you guys ruled out accident or incompetence when it comes to the balloon on the part of the Chinese?
Oh, that face. Let's go back. It's the best way to finish this. Damn it. Yeah, there we go. That's the one. Freeze frame that shit. Alright, that's gonna be our tag for the night, guys. That shit is funny. This guy's face, man. I love it. Fucking just. Alright, that's gonna be our tag for the night. Love it. Love it. Alright, let's debunk this asshole. Alright, no. We gotta go to the next day. And then we'll debunk this asshole. Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon. A couple things, and then I will turn to your questions. First, earlier today, a plane arrived at Dulles International Airport carrying 222 individuals who had been held by the government of Nicaragua. That includes students, journalists, and political activists. Some of these individuals had spent years in prison. The government of Nicaragua decided to release these individuals, and the United States decided to receive them on humanitarian grounds. Everyone who left the country voluntarily consented to travel. The individuals released have access to medical and legal assistance, and we continue to look for ways to support them as needed. All individuals entering the United States were screened and vetted by U.S. Customs and Border Protection as a standard for those receiving humanitarian parole. We welcome the opportunity to offer this humanitarian protection to these political prisoners. The release of these individuals by the government of Nicaragua marks a constructive step towards addressing the human rights abuses in that country. This action opens the door to discussion of other matters of mutual concern. The United States remains committed to a dialogue.
All right, they just go on about this for a while. There's a couple little clips in here that I want to get to, but I didn't pull out the exact seconds. All right, buddy. But yeah, so our condolences and these political prisoners and la da 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 da, and we're just back and forth with Nicaragua, and we did a great job with Nicaragua. The real thing I want to know is that if we're willing to take in these political prisoners from Nicaragua, and it's so very important that we take these prisoners in, then why maybe can we let go some of our domestic terrorists, our environmental activists, as I like to call them? Will some other country please come and take our American activists who are just fighting for their environment and who are now domestic terrorists and in jail? That would be great. I personally would really, really appreciate that. And if anybody could, I know I do get about 20% of my views from international folks. So if any international CIA is watching me, any other countries, intelligence agencies watching this, please take our domestic terrorists, because they're really just climate activists. They're not bad people. Yeah, that's my personal reach for y'all. All right, we can listen to this guy for a minute, maybe.
Into the region that we hope will be able to join the recovery efforts. Our existing humanitarian partners are using U.S. resources to provide critical emergency relief, including food, water, shelter, medical care, and support staff to search and rescue efforts. We are proud to join the global efforts to help Turkey.
Yeah, they're proud to help Turkey. He says a lot about Turkey, a little bit about Syria. The real fact is, we all know we have been blocking and bombing Syria for so long that humanitarian aid, where this earthquake happened, is just massively worse than it would ever have been because of our bombings, because of our sanctions, because of the U.S.'s push to stop this.
Assad regime and elsewhere on the basis of need and need alone.
The Assad regime. The Assad regime. As a quick reminder, Assad, Putin, Netanyahu, there's several people in power for the same amount of time. We don't call them regimes, except for when we hate them.
Immediate life-saving humanitarian assistance to help the people in Syria recover from this disaster. The United States has been the leading humanitarian donor since the start of the Syrian war, providing more than $15 billion to the Syrian people in Syria and throughout the region. We will
Because we feel guilty, maybe? Like, I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason.
Will show that same leadership in response to this new crisis. We will also continue to demand unhindered humanitarian access all across Syria, including cross-border aid. We are grateful to the government of Turkey for moving swiftly to reopen border crossings so aid can flow into non-regime areas of northern Syria, and we welcome the news that the first UN aid convoy arrived today via the Bab al-Hawa crossing.
Oh my God, his just blatant disregard for facts is beautiful because, you know, we say that it's okay, and then, you know, we do nothing to actually open up the actual will. I just realized the clip I want to show you actually shows the biggest part of this. So we can just go to the clip. We don't actually have to keep going with this part of this. We will come back to you, but much, much later in your life. Somewhere in there. Let's see if that saves. But let's go to Useful Idiots. We are useful idiots here, aren't we now? At least fans of the genre, but Useful Idiots did. Aaron Mate is fantastic, and he did exactly what we wanted him to. He went off on this fucking subject, and he is a very knowledgeable person. So, start out with Aaron.
Are 4 basic food groups, and I have Democrats suck, and for Democrats suck this week, I'm going to talk about their approach to the earthquake in Syria, which, along with...
So yeah, let's have an actual journalist, which I am not. We are just hanging out, right? Let's have an actual journalist debunk the Syria bullshit.
Death toll is in the thousands, and now the U.S. is in a policy situation where it's official U.S. policy to block aid to Syria because of sanctions. So official U.S. policy in Syria is to deny aid because of crippling sanctions. And even in the face of this disaster, the U.S. is not willing to lift those sanctions. So first, let's go to Antony Blinken expressing what he calls his solidarity with the Syrian people. This is what he says. The U.S. expresses our deepest condolences for the tragic loss of life in Turkey and Syria from today's earthquakes. Our initial assistance response to our ally Turkey is underway, and we stand ready to provide aid directly to the Syrian people. No, Antony Blinken, you do not, because your official policy is to impose sanctions that block aid to the Syrian people, and this is the New York Times making this very plain. So the Times notes accurately, quote, Syria is not able to receive direct aid from many countries because of sanctions. And those sanctions are led by the U.S., which basically has imposed a policy of sanctioning anybody, not just Syrians, who try to engage in economic reconstruction inside of Syria after a decade of war. And here is a now senior Biden administration official named Dana Stroul. She now works for the Pentagon and oversees Middle East policy there, including Syria, making this plain in 2019, where she explained that most of Syria is rubble and that the U.S. can prevent reconstruction.
The rest of Syria, though, is...
Man, he shows like 2 clips from her, 3 clips from her. I gotta write her name down. This was so based. Like, she is so fucking good. Like, so solid. All of her information was just straight up needed. And I need to get her fucking name because I didn't think about that earlier today. And sometimes you gotta do it in the moment. Alright.
Is rubble. And what the Russians want and what Assad wants is economic reconstruction. And that is something that the United States can basically hold a card on via the international financial institutions and our cooperation with the Europeans. So we argue that absent behavioral changes by the Assad regime, we should hold the line on preventing reconstruction aid and technical expertise from going back into Syria.
The U.S. has blood on, I mean, not surprisingly, as it always does, has blood on its hands while claiming to care about humanitarian issues.
That's a top Biden official back in 2019 bragging that most of Syria is rubble and the U.S. can keep it that way. And fast forward to 2023, there's now more rubble from this earthquake, and official U.S. policy is to prevent aid that can help Syria's reconstruction. And Ned Price, who is the State Department spokesperson, was asked about this by journalist Saeed Erekat, who was with Al-Quds Daily. And Saeed Erekat questioned Ned Price about the U.S. policy of preventing aid to Syria via sanctions.
The border, Saeed. We are determined to do what we can to address the humanitarian needs of the Syrian people. We've done that over the course of the 12-year civil war to the tune of billions of dollars. We do that through a different process. In Turkey, we have a partner in the government. In Syria, we have a partner in the form of NGOs on the ground who are providing humanitarian support.
Well, let me just follow up on this because the Syrian government, as far as I know, it's a government that you still recognize. You have never unrecognized the Syrian government. So why not reach out to the Syrian government? They are in power. They're the ones that run these rescue operations or aid operations and so on. It would be a great gesture. Another gesture would be to sort of lift the sanctions that have basically, suffocated Syria.
Said, and I'm going to resist the temptation to go into your advocacy rather than questioning, but I will make the point that it would be quite ironic, if not even counterproductive, for us to reach out to a government that has brutalized its people over the course of a dozen years now, gassing them, slaughtering them, being responsible for much of the suffering that they've endured. Instead, we have humanitarian partners on the ground who can provide the type of assistance in the aftermath of these tragic earthquakes, but these humanitarian partners who have been active on the ground since the earliest days of the civil war. This is a regime, Saeed, that has never shown any inclination to put the welfare, the well-being, the interests of its people first. Now that its people are suffering even more, we're going to continue doing what has proven effective over the course of the past dozen years or so, providing significant amounts of humanitarian assistance to partners on the ground. These partners who, unlike the Syrian regime, are there to help the people rather than brutalize them.
So you had Saeed Erekat, and now you're going to hear from Al-Quds, and now you're going to hear from Matt Lee from AP. And what's interesting is that these two journalists are probably consistently the only remotely adversarial voices that you hear from at these press conferences. So let's hear what he has to say.
And I apologize for missing the call. How do you think it would be ironic?
To use this as an opportunity to reach out to a regime that has brutalized its people when its people are in an even more dire situation.
Okay, no, all right. Maybe I'm not. Maybe my understanding of the word irony is a little bit different.
So Matt Lee is rightly pushing back on why it would be ironic to actually help the people of Syria. Also, Ned Price says that what they've been doing has been productive over the last 12 years. I wonder what he means by productive. Producing what? And what have they been productive?
Well, what he means is that the U.S. has spent billions of dollars on Syria, but instead of helping people, it's destroyed the country. The U.S. on Syria authorized one of the most expensive covert programs in the CIA's history, which was to arm sectarian death squads that were fighting the Syrian government. And that has left Syria in ruins. And now, with Syria largely rubble, and now facing even more rubble because of an earthquake, the U.S. response is to put sanctions on Syria and claim that it's doing so in response to Syrian human rights abuses. What it omits is that all this violence in Syria resulted from the Syrian government defending itself from a dirty war, from the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, the U.K., spending billions and billions of dollars arming one of the most well-armed insurgencies in history. And so Syria fought back with the help of Russia and Iran, and that has led to massive death and suffering inside Syria. So he admits the part where the U.S. played a role in all of the carnage inside Syria, because we're still not allowed to acknowledge one of the most expensive covert programs in CIA history. And when he refers to our partners on the ground providing aid, he's talking about groups like the White Helmets, which, as I've reported on, we don't have to get into here, but they basically work hand in glove with sectarian death squads. When Al-Qaeda took over the province of Idlib, White Helmets members were celebrating with them. A leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria described the White Helmets as hidden soldiers.
Hidden soldiers. The White Helmets, hidden soldiers, funded by the U.S. military and UK special forces. White Helmets.
Death squads. When Al-Qaeda took over the province of Idlib, White Helmets members were celebrating with them. A leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria described the White Helmets as hidden soldiers of the Mujahideen. So the people that Ned Price is praising here as humanitarians are actually the Mujahideen, the people who are in Al-Qaeda. And that was made plain by Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, who 10 years ago wrote an email to Hillary Clinton saying that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. So in Syria, the U.S. is on the side of Al-Qaeda, not on the side of the Syrian people who it's denying aid to and now reconstruction aid to in the aftermath of an earthquake. So anyway, that's a long-winded version of Democrats suck, but it's very important to bring out because this...
It is very important to bring out. So we're going to keep fucking talking about it. All right, we're going to go to the interview because they did an interview about this very subject. And I think it's important to get deeper into this because one of my biggest things, I fight for the environment, but also sanctions are like one of the most common types of war that we constantly wage as the U.S. And as U.S. citizens, we have to call out our congressmen, we have to call out our senators, we have to call out our local politicians and tell them sanctions are anti-capitalist. I'm anti-capitalist, but if they want to pretend that they're capitalists, sanctions are anti-capitalist. Let's block sanctions. Let's open up capitalism, and fucking stop starving fucking poor people and countries we oppose because it doesn't hurt this common, like, it doesn't hurt rich.
In Syria,
It hurts the fucking common person. Like, sanctions don't hurt Assad. Sanctions don't hurt Biden or Putin. Sanctions don't hurt these people. They hurt the common person. So, yeah, end all sanctions.
generally, but also how they are right now intersecting with the recovery efforts.
Let me just take the bull by the horns. The U.S. administration has said that all aid can get through, that sanctions do not affect the aid. And that's technically true, but in fact, it's not true. It's not true for a number of reasons. First of all, the one thing that would make a real difference today, considering the terrible destruction that's taken place in cities like Latakia, Aleppo, right across Syria, is to be able to wire money to your loved ones. Everybody has somebody in Syria that they want to help, and we can't do it. We can't do it because all the SWIFT codes have been blocked, and America has not lifted this. So you can't send money to your mother-in-law or your father or your brother or anybody who's got no house, who needs to rent a place, whatever it is. They need hospital care. So that is a big part of sanctions, is that Syria has been debanked. Now,
And what are SWIFT codes for people who don't know?
SWIFT code is like your ABA bank routing number on the bottom of your check. You have to, if you're going to wire money, you have to give that because it tells the wiring services which bank you're sending the money to, your bank account, and then your wiring number. The SWIFT code is the international wiring number, and they all go through a central place. And America, because everything is done with dollars, America can say no SWIFT codes. And they banned this. They sanctioned people who use those SWIFT codes. So nobody can send money to Syria. Now, that's number one issue. But there are many other issues. For example, no ship will land in a Syrian port because Assyrian ports are considered to be terrorist organizations that contribute money to the government, which has been sanctioned. And that means that companies like Lloyd's of London will not insure any boat that goes to Syria. And there are only a few big insurers that reinsure all these, tankers and merchant marine ships. None of them will do business. So that means that oil to get to Syria has to go on a government-owned Russian or Iranian ship. And there are just not that many of them.
And those have been bombed by Israel as well when they've tried, coming from Iran.
Right. There's a Wall Street Journal article explaining that over a dozen tankers has scuttled because Israel's putting mines on them at the water point, and then they have to go to port and they can't get through. I don't know whether Israel's doing that today. We don't have further intelligence on that. But there is this secret war that's going on between Israel and Iran, where they're attacking each other's ships and they're trying to hinder all this because Syria, Israel has a big interest in trying to starve Syria and weaken Syria because it's getting Iranian help, military help. That's a major problem. So, and Syria doesn't have any oil. The second biggest problem after the debanking is oil and fuel. I was just talking to my brother-in-law in Latakia the other day, and they don't have enough oil or electricity. Electricity 1 hour a day. But they have a generator, but they can't get oil and fuel to run a generator. So what they've done is there is a hospital 3 blocks away, and they've wired a wire from the generator of the hospital to their apartment. And they have to buy this by kilowatt hour, and it's very expensive. But the hospital gets oil first because the government has a very limited amount, and they're funneling it out to people that need it, like hospitals. And so the hospital, in order to generate funds to do its services, sells this to the neighborhood. And that's the way Syria is working today.
How does the U.S. military occupation of Syria, occupying its oil-rich areas, factor into Syria's fuel shortages?
It's monstrous. It's monstrous because the vast majority of Syria's oil and gas is in that northeastern sector that the United States occupied. And as we recall, at the end of ISIS, the Syrian army and the U.S. army raced to grab the oil fields, and the Russians were helping the Syrians. And 200 Russian soldiers were killed because the Americans bombed the crap out of them when they tried to grab the oil. And America took it because they wanted that oil. First of all, they wanted to deny it to Assad in order to starve the Syrians and put them in the situation that they are in today. And secondly, they needed it to fund their proxy military, the Kurdish YPG, and now the Syrian the Democratic Forces. So that money is paying for the American occupation in a sense and funding this proxy army, but it's also serving to gain leverage. That's the way people in Washington put it on Assad. The problem with the sanctions regime, it hasn't changed any of the policies of President Assad.
Go figure. A leader that's running a nation for a bunch of rich people isn't worried about sanctions because they're rich and they can still get shit. All right, y'all saw the Bernie shirt. It's freezing. Gotta go.
Architecture in Syria has not changed. Assad is not making any concessions to the United States because of it. So it's become an instrument it's become a collective punishment that hurts the most vulnerable people in Syria, and that's women and children. And today, when people don't have houses and they're sitting outside in the freezing cold, that's who's getting hurt, is the poor. Because the people who've got a few pennies to rub together are getting other apartments and are being helped by, people they have outside. But it's the poor that are getting hurt. It's not us.
Hey, that's what it said. Sanctions are war. They kill the poor. That's a good one for you. Sanctions are war. They kill the poor. Our war against poor people doesn't hurt the government and the rich people.
He's eating 3 meals a day, and there's a lot of literature that suggests that these authoritarian regimes strengthen because of sanctions, because everybody becomes totally dependent on the handouts from the government.
Also, they can blame the foreign powers that are imposing the sanctions, right? They become
Yes.
a convenient bad and justifiable bad guy.
Yes, it is a justifiable. Now, there was a lot of other things. Obviously there's corruption, there's authoritarianism, and the Lebanese banking system collapsed, and the currency is, there's a heap load of problems in Syria. I don't want to deny that and say that it's American sanctions, but American sanctions are a very important aspect. And we've seen this in country after country, whether it was Iraq or whether it was Iran. The currency collapses, debanking. International trade is important. And when you stop international trade and you forbid companies from moving in, it's very difficult. And it's not, America can say, well, we're not stopping anybody from sending aid, that's humanitarian aid in. And they're correct in the sense that they're not saying it to people. But my bank, every company I know that I've tried to work with to get anything to Syria has a protocol, because they read OFAC, they read the Treasury Department's warnings, and they wrote up a long and complicated protocol on which countries you cannot trade with, and we will not allow banking services or anything else to go through to Syria. If you try to put GoFundMe and you put the word Syria in GoFundMe, you get an automatic answer back saying you can't do that. We can't trade with Syria. So all these companies have already put in place these very complicated protocols, and they've educated all their people on where you can send money and where you can't. So even though Washington says, oh, we're not stopping that aid, no company is going to do it. Lloyd's of London isn't going to insure those ships. No ship is going to go to Syria. How are you going to convince them to do this, to change all their protocols and to rearrange it? You're not, because they know those sanctions are coming back. They're going to snap back as soon as this is out of the news, and it's just not. It's not going to happen. So there is a massive detrimental effect from the sanctions, despite Washington trying to deflect any criticism.
And nobody in Syria voted for the sanctions, voted for the bureaucrats in Washington who are imposing sanctions on them and denying them life-saving aid, which speaks to, I think, the fact that the authoritarian regimes are in Washington as well and denying other people the basics they need to live. But on that point, you pointed out that the U.S. sees occupying Syria and taking its fuel as leverage. Well, let's go to a clip of a senior U.S. official admitting just that. This is Dana Stroul, who is now a top Pentagon official handling the Middle East, so countries like Syria, speaking back in 2019. And this is what she said about how the U.S. occupying Syria and sanctioning Syria gives it leverage over Syria.
The United States still had compelling forms of leverage on the table to shape an outcome that was more conducive and protective of U.S. interests. And we identified 4. So the first one was the 1/3 of Syrian territory that was owned via the U.S. military with its local partner, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, this was a light footprint on the U.S. military, only about 1,000 troops over the course of the Syria Study Group's report, and then the tens of thousands of forces, both Kurdish and Arab, under the Syrian Democratic Forces. And that 1/3 of Syria is the resource-rich, it's the economic powerhouse of Syria. So where the hydrocarbons are, which obviously is very much in the public debate here in Washington these days, as well as the agricultural powerhouse. But we argued that it wasn't just about this 1/3 of Syrian territory that the U.S. military and our military presence owned, both to fight ISIS and also as leverage for affecting the overall political process for the broader Syrian conflict. There were 3 other areas of leverage. One is political and diplomatic isolation of the Assad regime, so holding the line on diplomatic isolation, preventing embassies from going back into Damascus. 2 is the economic sanctions architecture. So some of this is part of the maximum pressure campaign of the Trump administration on Iran, but there's a whole suite of both executive and congressional sanctions on Syria and Bashar al-Assad, both for human rights abuses in Syria and to the backers of Assad for their activities in support of him in Syria. And 3 was reconstruction aid. So the United States remains the overall largest single donor of humanitarian aid to Syrians both inside Syria and refugees outside of Syria. And there was some stabilization assistance in the part of Syria that was liberated from ISIS and controlled via the Syrian Democratic Forces in northern eastern Syria. The rest of Syria, though, is rubble. And what the Russians want and what Assad wants is economic reconstruction. And that is something that the United States can basically hold a card on via the international financial institutions and our cooperation with the Europeans. So we argued that absent behavioral changes by the Assad regime, we should hold the line on preventing reconstruction aid and technical expertise from going back into Syria.
Damn, they're gonna suck me in like that and then give me a commercial. Whoa, that's in my face. Whoa, that's in my face. Hey, if I play this for like 10 seconds, I bet I'll get a few streamers on here, huh? Play a fucking, this game that's making people pissed off. Not my thing.
That's Danish
I
rule
don't
in
game.
2019. Now she's occupying a senior Pentagon position for the Middle East under Joe Biden. Do you think that the U.S. policy is the same today in 2023 as she outlined in 2019, owning Syria to give itself, owning 1/3 of Syria via the military occupation, and holding a line on reconstruction aid to keep Syria in rubble, as she brags about? Is that still the policy today? And do you think it will stay like this in the aftermath of this devastating earthquake?
Yes, it is the policy today. I don't think there's any doubt about that. U.S. continues to deny Syria its own oil. It continues to deny most of the agricultural goods that are there. This oil is being shipped out of Syria through Iraq, which takes, it's a very cumbersome way to move Syria's oil, because there are pipelines that go from these fields to Banias and other government refineries, which then have traditionally refined it and sent it to the areas that need it. This is very detrimental. And it's about leverage to try to get, if you continued her speech on, she would explain that this leverage is going to be used to change the political landscape of Syria. And, ultimately, she believes that Assad can be driven out of Syria. And that's, there are a lot of people who support this, and unfortunately, a lot of the Syrian opposition supports these sanctions too. And that's because this terrible civil war, and their only way of getting home is to get Assad out. And so they're willing to do just anything that they can, even if it means the suffering of the other Syrian people, because they've been suffering too. And the problem is, I can understand the moral dilemma here, but the problem is that Assad is not leaving. We spent 13 years arming all kinds of people, good and bad actors, to try to leverage, to try to make the Syrian army come to the United States and beg for a solution which would force them to get rid of Assad. They didn't do it. They went to Russia, they went to Iran, and they won the war. And largely because the Syrian opposition spooked America, turned into ISIS and Al Qaeda, and America dropped their support for it, as so did the Saudis and other people. That's not going to change. There isn't going to be an opposition that comes up because of these sanctions and drives out the Assad regime, in the same way that there's not going to be widespread demonstrations. And this is in some ways the dilemma of trying to unseat these authoritarian regimes, because the people are fragmented and they're poor, and they desperately need the state services that only the state can give them. Education, they need electricity, they need passports renewed, all the stuff that they are totally dependent on the state. So they're not going to overthrow this government, and that's what everybody is coming to that conclusion already. The UAE has made that conclusion. Sisi just called, Egypt just called Assad. The Turks, the biggest opponent, are now in dialogue for diplomacy. And the Saudis have made noises in that direction and say, we're not doing it because America, and we want some political concessions from Assad, but we're open to dialogue. And America's trying to keep their foot on the brake and make sure that this doesn't happen, thinking that they're going to still get some kind of leverage. And it's just not going to happen. And that's partly because Biden withdrew from Afghanistan and he got mud on his face for it. And it was, it's something the Republicans are going to take to the bank in elections. And if he withdraws from Syria, which is what the correlation would be, people are going to get hurt. He's going to get more mud on his face. And even though the Republicans, by and large, want to withdraw from Syria, they're going to pretend that they didn't, and that this was terrible. So Biden's going to kick it down the road, because he's not going to do two of those in one term. And America needs to stay. And that means they need to have this isolation campaign. They need to keep Assad down. And that's their policy. And it sells well in Washington, unfortunately.
What mistakes, by the way, do you think Biden made in the execution of pulling troops out of Afghanistan? Or do you think it was inevitable that he would be slammed for it?
I think it's inevitable that he was going to be slammed for it. Everybody in America misunderstood what was going on. Every authority, every American military leader that had spent years on the Afghan beat said that the regime was going to last 6 months, a year. Everybody blew hot air at him because is all full of wishful thinking. So there was no good time to get out.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me a bit, the sanctions reminds me a bit of the situation with Cubans who, I'm not going to generalize
it's interest groups in the United States. It's domestic.
Right. It's interest groups, and also people who are more interested in, this is the generalization part, but some people are much more interested in inflicting harm on leadership or governments than they are on the quality of life of the people living under them. Mm-hmm. And even though it doesn't even affect the leadership, as you pointed out, it's not still going to eat 3 meals a day. but I feel like there's some kind of vindictive nature to some of the people in some of this.
Yes, there is. And even if for those people who don't see it as vindictive, they see it as punishing a bad actor,
right,
and that not letting him get off the hook for, fighting this brutal war. That's
work,
wishful thinking. It's just, it's not, that's not who it's hurting. It's hurting these poor people on the ground who don't have electricity and can't reconstruct and don't have schools. And, in the long run, it's just bad policy, because the only way.
In the long run, it's just bad policy. Sanctions are just bad policy in the long run. And yeah, that's why I'm going to scream to the end of my days. Fucking sanctions are war. They all need to be ended. And I probably will be screaming it to the end of my fucking days, because it's what we do, right? We just fight against the current as long as we can.
The U.S., the only way we know to promote democracy that's solid, that's not going to just collapse like it did in Tunisia or something, in the long run, is if people have 3 square meals a day, they can go to school, they can get educated, and you have a real middle class that begins to make demands on a leadership and that can stand on its own. And we're going backwards. In places like Iran or Syria or Iraq or Lebanon, people are getting dumber. I mean, I hate to put it in those terms, but they're getting less educated, they're getting more desperate, and they're learning to stab their neighbor in the back and not to compromise, because it becomes a dog-eat-dog world. In this situation where you have collapsing GDP and a collapsing currency, you have to fight for every little shred.
And the sanctions that, rob you of basic necessities, medicines, certain imports get blocked, food gets spoiled before it gets to you, all that kind of shit.
That you get. And that's not the way to promote democracy. Democracy requires cooperation, right, and a willingness to compromise with your neighbors and to see everybody as one common family and community. Otherwise, if you don't accept the sort of common rules of a constitution, you're not going to have a democracy. And so by reducing the GDP of these countries and impoverishing people, you're just going to push off the horizon of possible democracy promotion. That's the real truth. And you are ultimately pursuing a very vindictive.
Yes, we are watching this entire thing because this is this guy was awesome. Like, absolutely just awesome. That's not what I did at all.
Policy, which is, we're going to punish Russia, we're going to punish Iran, we're going to punish those people who are our enemies, who've helped Assad.
And trauma they've experienced, oh my God, no. I mean, they've been off and on bombed by terrorist groups that the United States have funded. They've been just constant harassment by all sorts of, Israel still bombing North Syria. Like, they bomb them once in a while too. So yeah, it's the traumatic experience.
If it turns into a quagmire for them, so much the better.
And before the dirty war, Syria had among the highest rates of education, food self-sufficiency, and healthcare in the Middle East. And I'm wondering, had there not been a dirty war where so many foreign sponsors spent all this money funneling the country with weapons, do you think that there was the possibility there for the political system opening up and becoming less authoritarian?
Assad, like so many dictators, whether it's in China or elsewhere, he promised, when he came to power in 2000, took power from his father who died, he promised Syrians a chicken in every pot, that he was going to modernize Syria. And he went about, opening up the internet, allowing for banking system, stock exchange, new hotels, all these imports that had been banned got to come in. So the upper classes of Syria got to live a much better life, one that they've been seeing on TV for other people having all these imports. And now they could do the same thing. Of course, it created a lot of class differences, but he wasn't going to compromise politically. He was going to maintain power. And this, unfortunately, is the dilemma of a minoritarian regime, which we have so many in the Middle East, particularly in Iraq and we used to have in Lebanon, is that the Alawites, who are 12%, a religious group, and other religious groups that are allied with them, like the Christians and the Druze and so forth, are willing to fight like mad in order to keep Sunni Islamists from taking power. And we saw this in the Civil War because ISIS and Al-Qaeda loomed up and looked very threatening to any minority. There are almost no minorities left in rebel-held territories because they were driven out. Some were forced to convert, as ISIS did in the Druze territories, but also Al-Qaeda and other Islamists, they treated them just really shabbily and kidnapped them. So it wasn't, the Syrian war became much more brutal than it had to be because of these ethnic divisions in the country. And they're ones that continue to today, and it makes it so hard to find the right policy. because somebody is going to lose in this environment. And the worse the economy becomes, the more resentment really builds up between these various groups, and the less possibility it is to heal those wounds. And that's what's really, in the American Civil War, it was Reconstruction and rebuilding that really healed the wounds, and mitigated some of the anger. And that anger still boils underneath. It doesn't, it's not too hard to find it in places in the United States, and we're 150 years away from it. So it's a delicate process.
But we are not letting them reconstruct in Syria. We are blocking them all the way. We do not let them get construction equipment. We do not let them use their ports. Their ports of entry are considered terror zones or whatever. So that's where we're at. We don't let them build. Their depression, their angst, their cities are just falling apart because we're not letting them get gear and materials. And I think they'll cover that here in a second. I'm sorry, jumping ahead.
And mitigated some of the anger. And that anger still boils underneath. It doesn't, it's not too hard to find it in places in the United States, and we're 150 years away from it. So it's a delicate process.
When it comes to the areas worst hit by the earthquake, Aleppo and Latakia, talk to us about these places and what they're going through now.
Well, let me just read you a few statistics. In Latakia, for example, 506 people yesterday were known to be dead and almost 1,000 injured. 102 buildings had collapsed. In Jeble, which is a next town down on the coast, smaller town, there were 250 people dead, 171 injured, 120 buildings had collapsed. 248 schools have collapsed in Syria, 71 in Aleppo, 50 in Latakia, 27 in Hama, 99 in Tartus. These are way, way down the coast, close to Beirut. The damage is and we only know it, the tip of the iceberg, because it's very hard to get this kind of information out because electricity is not working, internet's not working. So much has collapsed that we're going to find much worse statistics that are coming out. And that's already 50% of the hospitals and clinics in Syria had been either destroyed or woefully damaged during the civil war. They haven't reconstructed. And now this is, there's no facilities to take care of them. And this is, it's a terrible situation.
We have, I thought this is very short, but we can just look at some of this drone footage because I think sometimes it's easier to get a sense of the enormity of something when you see it.
The devastation is tremendous. And people say, oh, we can bring some in from Turkey, but almost no aid is going to come in from Turkey. There's one road, Bab al-Hawa. These are the rebel-held areas, and that aid is getting. The Turks need it. I have two Turkish friends who are trying to see if I have any connections with the State Department to get their people out of terrible places. They're American citizens, and everything has collapsed in Antakya and places near Syria. Just widespread devastation, and hospitals have come down. So that aid, Turkey's not going to be sending that aid to Syria, and NGOs aren't going to drive a mile before they're going to be overwhelmed with the troubles. Many of the roads, you look at the roads on those videos, you'll see these giant fault lines, and the roads have been destroyed going into Syria. So they've got to be quickly repatched up. The airport in Antakya, the runways were ruined. Now they probably in a day or two they can fix those up, but it really has been devastating. And so the aid that's likely to get to Syria is going to be very delayed, and by the time it does, many people will have died under the rubble. And there's not enough moving equipment. This is where things like sanctions have had a terrible effect, because you can't order a tractor or moving equipment from Caterpillar or from any of these other big companies because they won't sell to Syria. And whether that's considered aid or not, I don't know if it's considered aid. We just don't have any clarity from the government, which says, oh, we're not stopping emergency aid. What is emergency aid? We don't know what it is, and companies don't know what it is either. And they're not going to change they're not going to do this stuff. So it's a very sticky problem.
Can you talk about the dispute that's arisen over that one internationally allowed border crossing between Syria and Turkey for aid? Syria and Russia want aid also sent through Damascus. The U.S. and its allies insist on just that one border crossing between Turkey and Syria.
The bottom line is that every actor in Syria is using food as a weapon.
And to hear the rest of the interview, please go.
Food as a weapon? That's horrible. I'm always hungry. I am always hungry, so taking food away from me sounds like the worst thing you could ever do.
Actually, beyond.
Yes. All right. I think All right, I said 105.40.
What you've seen from the United States and the ROK and the United States and Japan, the types of defensive maneuvers that we have undertaken, that is to ensure that we make good on the commitment that we have to the ROK and Japan.
All right, this is part 2 of him. We will get through the second part. Part 2. Dun dun dun. So the second part here is a 2-minute bit. Starts here in about 30 seconds. And then from there, we will go to our second big segment of the night, which is a government secret segment. Bam, Lee Camp, gotta love it.
That our commitment to their security remains ironclad. We are doing that in the face of provocations from the DPRK. We would like to see the DPRK cease these provocations. We would like to see the DPRK engage in dialogue. But until and unless that happens, our approach will remain the same. Yes. So you've
All right. So here we come. Here we go.
already had a question. I want to make sure that you go ahead. You haven't had a question.
Thank you. I'm sure you're aware.
All right. Gotta get this nice and full screen. This is a solid 2 minutes of good information, and we're gonna slow it down to natural speed because this is important.
Approach will remain the same.
Yes.
And so you've already had a question. I want to make sure that you go ahead. You haven't had a question.
Thank you. I'm sure you're aware of the new report from Seymour Hersh, how America took out the Nord Stream pipeline and the White House.
Look at his reaction. Head down.
Denial of any involvement, given the longstanding U.S. opposition to the pipeline. Secretary Blinken.
Okay, I'm sorry. I reacted too hard to his fucking his facial structure. Let's let the question happen because oh man, like he's just like oh Jesus Christ, are you serious? All right, we got. I'll do the whole thing through. I'll try not to stop it. Let's do this.
Sure that you go ahead. You haven't had a question.
Thank you. I'm sure you're aware of the new report from Seymour Hersh, how America took out the Nord Stream pipeline and the White House's denial of any involvement, given the longstanding U.S. opposition to the pipeline. Secretary Blinken's calling its demise a tremendous opportunity, and Under Secretary of State Nuland's saying that the U.S. officials were pleased with the destruction of the pipeline, especially the Sweden's secretive investigation. Do you think the U.S. government's denial of involvement is credible?
I absolutely do, and I repeat it here. Anything else?
Let me follow up on that, if I might.
Look at damn face. Oh man, look at his stupid face.
Have you or anybody else at the State Department any communication with German, Norwegian ambassadors or other allies or officials on this matter?
On the matter of Nord Stream 2?
On the matter of the latest allegations, which give a fairly, I mean, it's one anonymous source, but it is a fairly
it would not be it would not be typical for us to engage allies and partners on something that is utter and complete nonsense and that should be rejected out of hand by anyone who is looking at it through through an objective lens. Yes, go ahead.
An objective lens. All right, dude.
One more aspect on this. One of the allegations that Hersh makes is that it was taken off the CIA in order to prevent involvement, oversight as a covert operation. Did you read the piece?
I'm familiar with it.
One of his allegations is that it was taken off the CIA.
Look, rather than let this propaganda be aired in the briefing room, but let me.
Oh, all right. Here's another one for you. Damn it. Rather than take this off, let this propaganda be aired in the briefing room. Oh, fucking man. All right, let's not let the propaganda be aired in the briefing room here.
Well, some fun stuff that happened in front of the UN 20 years ago, you know, about a country in the Middle East. You grab hell wet.
Oh my God. Graham, what are you doing watching me?
And amazingly enough, the first segment of Government Secrets, Nord Stream Truth. Isn't that fucking beautiful? All right, Government Secrets, I believe it's 33 minutes. The first couple minutes, I'm going to eat my fucking dinner. and enjoy it with you guys, and then we'll maybe have a little discussion. But I gotta eat. Haven't eaten dinner yet.
Through my computer.
Ah, I love it. I just like watching.
Awkward.
Hi, Lee. What are you wearing? Can I comb your beard?
Please do that. Why have they not created that technology? Come on, Apple. Why can't you comb people's beard through the screen?
I just want to comb your hair, beard. I want to comb your beard, Lee. I just want to make sure your beard hair is nice.
And I want to fix your Superman curl, which is really failing today.
It really fell apart. I don't know what.
I don't even know what it is anymore.
It's more just like a weird semicolon thing.
You know what it is? It's Count Chocula today, I think.
It is. We are very,
Count Chocula.
We are very Count Chocula, whatever. Yeah, it's very Count Chocula today. So, folks, we have a fantastic episode. We're going to talk about all the fun things that happened from Agent Orange, and there's more secrets involving an Agent Orange. If you don't know about that, we're going to cover that today. And Lee's going to discuss.
And we don't often do things that happen like today or yesterday, right. But this time we are, because we now have the play-by-play of how the U.S. bombed the Nord Stream pipelines, and it's pretty incredible.
It's incredible. The Government Secrets did an episode of a secret that literally happened the same day that I watched Ned Price lie to us. Like, that propaganda. Like, I love watching him and then getting the episode of this. And I am glad to share this a second time with you guys.
I know normally we aren't like, we got to cover breaking news. We don't really do that on their show. We usually do it on our other shows, but it's so relevant to everything we discuss on this show because this is a massive government secret.
Yeah.
It's something all of us sort of anti-war lefties suspected when this first happened.
We all said like, oh, it's ridiculous that Russia would bomb their own pipeline. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But beyond that, it's like none of us had any proof or sources or.
No, all we had was there's no motive for Russia to do this. It's a revenue stream for them. Why would they blow up their own and hurt their own money?
Massive revenue stream, and they spent billions of dollars to build those pipelines. Yeah.
So why would they do it? So, Lee, why don't you break down everything the United States did to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline and government secrets, segment number 1. America doing more good in the world.
All right. So this is coming from Seymour Hersh, which many people may know. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning. He's considered one of the best journalists America has ever created. This is the guy who revealed the My Lai massacre, among other things, in Vietnam. He covered Watergate. But slowly, over time, our media became more and more captured by the corporate state and corporate America. And on top of that, he, refused to kind of settle back, like Woodward and Bernstein have settled back into like we're just going to go after Donald Trump, or we're not really going to harm the systems. And so they're allowed on the mainstream media, whereas Seymour Hersh is no longer like, he had incredible reporting on how Syria didn't use chemical weapons, but it was like in a German newspaper because he won't be published in New York Times, Washington. He worked for the New York Times for years, Washington Post. They won't publish it. So this is coming from his Substack,
which is that right there.
State.
No, you're right. It is sad that this amazing journalist is so, I mean, like the way we have, but he has on a much bigger level of being throttled, censored. And this is how they censor him. It's just like, oh, we can't bring him on the show anymore. Or I don't know what the exact smears have been said about him, but I can only imagine it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like, oh, he's gone off the rails or he's this or that. And it's just that classic thing. And we talk about it in the Patreon bonus segment of neoliberals. You can be critical of like when Republicans do stuff or whatever, but now you can't be, when Democrats do awful things. This is going to reveal, this is Joe Biden's presidency has happened. This is what has happened. So.
Right. And yeah. And this, if this is an act by the United States, which it is an act of war, and it is putting us closer to nuclear war than we've been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, it's fucking insane is what it is.
Yeah.
So last June, Navy divers operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Balltops 22 planted the remotely triggered explosives.
I'm sorry, Balltop 22 is the name of my OnlyFans account, but please go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was so tempted to make a ball tops joke, and I couldn't come up with a good one, but I'll send it over your way.
There's no way the word ball tops 22 can be read on this show, and then at least one of us doesn't make it. I mean,
I think we'd actually lose a lot of viewers if we skipped over that that joke.
Really, the chat would blow. Really, you guys are just gonna let ball tops 22 just float by? No one's gonna say anything.
I believe ball tops is actually a description of a certain kind of behavior at an orgy. It's like when they ask you what kind, are you a pitcher? Are you a catcher? I'm a ball tops. Oh, you're a ball tops. Okay.
I'm a ball tops. Yeah. I'm ball tops 22. Oh, okay. I got it. All right.
So, NATO exercise known as ball tops 22 planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. 2 of the pipelines. That's the other thing about Seymour Hersh is he has, since 60 years ago or whatever, he has contacts deep in the Pentagon. And he also revealed how Obama was lying about the way they killed Osama bin Laden. But anyway.
But we can't get into that because Obama's tweets were nice and he was so fun and nice and cuddly. So.
Oh my God, his tweets are so lovable. He's just, what I like is he's like relatable. Like I could have a beer with him.
No.
2 of the pipelines, which were known collectively as Nord Stream 1, had been providing Germany and much of Western Europe with cheap Russian natural gas for more than a decade. A second pair of the pipelines called Nord Stream 2 had been built, but were not yet operational. Most of you know that part. Biden's decision to sabotage the pipelines came after more than 9 months of highly secret back and forth debate inside Washington's national security community about how best to achieve that goal. That is important because if they were debating it for 9 months before it happened, guess what's that puts it before? Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Wow.
So they were already planning on ways to blow up and stop this pipeline before the invasion.
So you got to wonder, and I don't know if Seymour Hersh has this direct evidence from his sources inside the Pentagon, and was part of this pre-invasion plan, did they go, what actually would help is if we could somehow spurn Putin into invading, then it gives us more cover under the wars happening in Ukraine. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of, I mean.
Yeah, this is a great one. I'm not going to lie. The Agent Orange one's okay. Graham segments are fine. You got to love government secrets, Lee Camp. Government secrets with Lee Camp. He comes so fucking thorough. He comes with all the information. You still have to listen to Graham's cringe jokes, but Graham's funny too once in a while. It is a good combination, and I do love Lee segments. Like, he comes and kills it. And this is important today, so we'll be getting there. We're doing another 23 minutes of this, so I'm going to pack another bowl for the second half of the show. If you got a drink or you got a bowl or a gummy or whatever you're doing, get yourself ready.
The understanding I get from this is that although they weren't thinking if they invade, we can bomb the pipeline, they were thinking if they invade, we can increase sanctions to some crazy level, which would stop the pipeline. So they were thinking, they were trying to help. They were trying to create that invasion. And they thought that Russia was going to invade, but all they would do is take the Donbass region. They did not, from everything I've read, they did not think Russia would go fully for Ukraine. But their hope was Russia would say Donbass is an independent region. They would count it as an invasion.
It's a good combo.
And then the U.S. could put all these sanctions to stop exactly what these pipelines allowed, which was massive cooperation, economic cooperation with France and Germany, and a lot of.
This is a good combo. It's a really good combo when Graham stays confined to jokes and doesn't get all goofy and shit. Which I don't know how he is sober. Like he is so different some days than other days. How he doesn't drink or do any drugs is just by me, because he is just so up and down, and when he's not goofy and off the wall, he's great. Great combination.
Income for Russia, etc.
Clearly they've been planning, and by they I mean the U.S. State Department and the Biden administration and all the psychos in both parties. I'm really, since this literally just came out, and I haven't seen any coverage of it on CNN or MSNBC. Now maybe yeah.
You haven't been watching enough. It's like they're just wall to wall.
Wall to wall.
Yeah. Not the walls they show on the air. It's like a back wall they don't show.
Right.
It's
all right.
Democracy Now! Covered it. I'll give Democracy Now!, which can definitely lean neoliberal on many times, but Democracy Now! Had this revelation from Seymour Hersh, and I'm curious too. I'm sure they're going to try to stifle this in Western Europeans media, but it feels like there's a better opportunity for, because if I'm living in Western Europe and this comes out, I'm now done. I'm furious. I mean, is this going to cause a ripple effect of like NATO? People are going to be like, we've talked about it, that there's been massive anti-NATO protests in Europe since the fall, which our media doesn't cover at all. But
and even at a
Yeah, is there gonna be a backlash? That's gonna be. I wonder if there is gonna be a backlash this weekend. Like now that this article has dropped this week, are people gonna protest anti-America this weekend? I don't know. I do a protest show on Mondays. I'll be looking then. It's an interesting theory.
higher level, it seems very obvious that Germany did not know anything about this, and Germany knew Germany may have, and I mean the ruling elite of Germany. Germany may have suspected it was the U.S., but I think they didn't have any evidence. They knew the U.S. wanted to stop the pipeline because that was said publicly, but I don't know that this could change something with Germany. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they're going to try to stifle this as much as they can here, but it's not. You can't stifle this everywhere, and I don't think it's going to. It's not going to do. Americans aren't going to like get up en masse in the streets and protest. I just don't see them doing that because of this. But I see this happen.
Not because of this, no. But I hope we get up and I hope something triggers us. I hope something triggers us into an all-out strike. I really do. I'm ready for it, but most motherfuckers aren't. Most motherfuckers be chill as shit. Sedentary lives. And their heads in the sand. They don't even know what's going on. So we got to inform them. First we got to get them to join this kind of group, this kind of discussion. After they break through the bullshit, then we might be able to get some motivation, right? First we got to get their heads out of the sand, though.
Happening in Europe was already
They're all out there except you and me. We had to do this live stream, so I'm not on the streets with them. But every American is marching right now.
Right. Just like they did when Edward Snowden, and WikiLeaks, right. They're all.
Cheers.
So the pipeline had been a boon for the German economy, which enjoyed an abundance of cheap Russian natural gas. America's political fears were real. Putin would now have an additional and much needed major source of income. The oil and gas is estimated to be upwards of 45% of Russia's income. And Germany and the rest of Western Europe would become addicted to low-cost natural gas supplied by Russia while diminishing European reliance on America. And again, this is just more evidence for what many of us have been saying, which is one of the other reasons that this proxy war in Ukraine was created by the U.S. is to stop European cooperation with Russia, because Europe was becoming their own thing a little bit. Like, they didn't need America. I mean, America's a dwindling empire. We're late-stage capitalists, and we're losing our hegemony. And Europe was becoming more independent, and especially Germany and France, the two really biggest powers, they were allying with Russia on certain things and getting their energy there. And yes, there's a money aspect too. America gets to now sell all that oil and gas to Europe, but I think that's a smaller issue of like
at like 6 times the rate that they're getting from Asia. We're selling them like it's costing them 3 to 6 times, I've heard, for their oil from America than it was from Russia.
Putting them back in their place as like vassal states to the United States.
Yeah, and to the point of America's now profiting. I remember I did a video on this roughly a year ago, where Biden said, we got to sanction Russia, and he said in his speech, like, now Western Europe can buy American natural gas, and it was revealed that our costs are more expensive, and I mean, and here we are. And when I was in Europe in October, when we were doing shows, they were like, they had just announced that, I was in Paris, and a friend of mine in Paris was like, they just announced we can't have, it's in centigrade, but the equivalent of our heat over 67 degrees in the winter. And now, I mean, just here in LA, I just got my bill for gas, and all across Southern California, there's like protests outside the gas company, outside of City Hall. Like, there's this huge protest, like the gas prices are through the roof, and the gas company cited some whatever Ukraine. So you see, like, I'm bringing all this up to show this is why they did this, because it's like, now we can make Western Europe not think they won't be financially independent anymore. We're also going to cripple Russia's revenue stream, and we can overcharge everybody for our natural gas. And you see, and so all these sanctions in Russia. So who's being hurt by America's sanctions and everything and blowing up the Nord Stream? Western Europe. And Americans. Americans are being hurt by this. So it's
meanwhile, the ruble has gained 8% on the dollar and something like far more than that on the euro.
And I've talked to 2 different friends of mine who live in Russia, and they're like, we don't really feel the sanctions here. We don't, like, the Russian economy is doing well. People are One guy said that some of his Russian friends, young men, guys, are like have split. They're like they moved out of Russia because they didn't want to be drafted into the war, and they're like, I don't want to go fight in Ukraine. So there's some of that, but there's also a lot of Russia being propagandized as well. But overall, the U.S. sanctions are not. It's not affecting Russia. It's affecting Western Europe and us.
Yep. So, Nord Stream 1 was dangerous enough, but Nord Stream 2, if approved by German regulators, would double the cheap gas. Yeah, I did that. Months earlier, after the fall of Afghanistan, German Prime Minister Scholz had publicly endorsed French President Macron's call for a more autonomous European foreign policy. We can't fucking have that, can we? In a speech in Prague, clearly suggesting less reliance on Washington.
No.
So, yet again, you're seeing all of the reasons that the U.S. needed this proxy war and needed to destroy Russia's ability to deliver gas to Europe. As long as Europe remained independent on the pipelines with cheap natural gas, Washington was afraid that countries like Germany would be reluctant to supply Ukraine with money and weapons it needed to defeat Russia. Boy, that would be horrible, right? If we didn't have other people enjoying, and partaking in our fucking megalomaniacal, sociopathic bloodlust. It was so at this unsettled moment that Biden authorized Jake Sullivan to bring together an interagency group to come up with a plan in December 2021, 2 months before the war in Ukraine began, if you don't count the 2014 coup and the killing of 15,000 in Donbass region. Jake Sullivan convened a meeting of a newly formed task force, including the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA, State and Treasury Departments, and asked for recommendations on how to respond to Putin's impending invasion. What became clear, and also this is another key point that he doesn't make here because that's not his purview, but so they get together in December 2021 knowing Putin's going to invade. Again, they might have thought it was just the Donbass, but they knew he was going to invade. He was amassing troops. It was clear. I didn't know that, but they knew that. And if you are a nuclear power and you know that this invasion could happen and you know...
Right there. They're a nuclear power. Racers, I mean, that's how they're a superpower. They're a nuclear power. That's what it takes. That's all it takes. If you're a nuclear power, you are a superpower. Like, straight up. If you can change the planet in an hour, I think that makes you a superpower.
Oh, Ukrainians could die, and you know we could put us on the brink of nuclear war. Don't you say, hey, let's sit down and fucking come to it.
I mean, they don't have the capabilities of India or China or Russia, but yeah. I mean, Pakistan is a power. You wouldn't fucking talk about Pakistan because of their economy or their like there's nothing else about Pakistan that people talk about, but you mention Pakistan because they're fucking, if they go off the wall, they're a fucking power.
The conclusion that involves no invasion and just peace. But
I mean, Pakistan might disappear in a conversation usually, but we know of them because of their capabilities, right? Like, it should be the kind of country that you even forget it even exists, but you don't forget it exists because they have that capability. I mean, there's a lot, like, how many countries like that's not a real word? That one you don't forget.
But they never do that. They don't want that. They don't in any way signal with Russia, we want to solve this before invasion begins.
No, invasion's good for business. I mean, pushing Russia into an invasion is like, let's back Putin into a corner so he has to do this. And again, they underestimated him. They thought he would just maybe invade Donbass again. They didn't think he was going to invade the whole country and turn it into a big war. And it's like, let's find the peaceful solution isn't anywhere on anyone's list in the Pentagon or the State Department or whatever idiot is in charge of whatever moron party is currently running this dumb, awful hellhole called America. And it's like, these guys, I'm really curious, and I don't, maybe I'm being overly optimistic here, so I don't want to hold out hope because you can't hold out any hope for anything in this country. But if Europe could go, oh, we're done with these guys. We're not doing this. We're out. And Zelensky could suddenly then pivot back to his pre-invasion, not even pre-invasion, his Boris Johnson meeting of no, we want to go to the negotiation table. Yeah, we want to go to the peace table, which Putin was like, yeah, all right, we'll go.
Yep.
Everyone was willing to do that until Boris Johnson came in and did his Benny Hill yakety sax. But we want to put missiles in Ukraine that'll antagonize Russia
at the behest of the United States.
Yeah, right. And so I don't know. This could be the thing because I've been watching this, and I know we've talked about it. Is this could be the thing that really isolates America. America wants to think, oh, Russia's isolated. It's kind of not. And everyone's a little sick of America, but just has to deal with it. And you're blowing up a pipeline.
That's the other thing, and it signals to the entire world, oh, this is allowable even when you're not at war with a country.
Yeah.
You can just go around blowing up their infrastructure. And it's not war? That sounds like an act of war.
It's a complete act of war. I mean, if Russia did this to one of our pipelines, that would be it, man. It would be, we would go big.
Nuclear weapons would fly, it seems like.
At the very least.
So honestly, we should all be sitting here thanking Russia just with everything we have that they didn't then respond with a nuclear missile.
I mean, at the very least, if Russia blew up one of our pipelines, we would, at the very least, there would be 200,000 American troops, NATO troops on the border of Russia right now, today. Like, there would be a draft enacted and America would be like, it's about time, we're going to settle this old score.
Or maybe like Boston Dynamics robot dog things.
Right, they would just unleash
a lot of those, just like 200,000 of those.
We would go bananas if Russia did this to us. We would go absolutely bananas. And so it's like, this could be the thing that makes us completely isolated from the world.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
I don't think
it is utterly insane. So you've got the secret meeting, right, of planning commission of Joint Chiefs of Staff, CIA, State and Treasury. Everyone involved understood the stakes. Seymour Hersh's source said they understood this is not kiddie stuff. If the attack were traceable to the United States, it's an act of war. Throughout all the scheming, the source told him, some working guys in the CIA and State Department were still saying, don't do this, it's stupid, and will be a political nightmare if it comes out. Yeah, you think?
You think, really?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the same joke, like, this will be a political nightmare if it comes out. I don't know. It seems like...
Nevertheless, in early 2022, the CIA working group reported back to Sullivan's group by saying we have a way to blow up the pipelines. February 7th, Biden defiantly said in a press conference, and so several in the working group were shocked by this. Biden goes out in the press conference, and I have this ready to play if you want to play it.
Let's play this. I'm sure this will be a really smart, coherent speech, Joe Biden.
Many people have seen